If the ranger hadn't recorded it, no one would believe what this bear did for the little girl. A wild encounter that defied everything we thought we knew about these predators. Deep in the wilderness, what started as a terrifying moment for a lost child turned into something so extraordinary that without video evidence, it would be dismissed as pure fiction. What happened between this massive wild animal and the vulnerable little girl breaks every rule of nature and might just change how we see these creatures forever. If the ranger hadn't recorded it, no one would believe what this bear did for the little girl. A wild encounter that defied everything we thought we knew about these predators. Deep in the wilderness, what started as a terrifying moment for a lost child turned into something so extraordinary that without video evidence, it would be dismissed as pure fiction. What happened between this massive wild animal and the vulnerable little girl breaks every rule of nature and might just change how we see these creatures forever. Park Ranger James Calloway had seen plenty during his 15 years patrolling Blackwood National Forest. But nothing could have prepared him for what his trail cameras would capture on that fateful autumn day. 7-year-old Lily Morgan was supposed to stay within sight of the campsite. "Just don't go past the big oak tree," her father had warned. But the butterfly with electric blue wings seemed to beckon her deeper into the woods, fluttering just out of reach with each step she took. One moment, the campsite was visible through the trees. The next, nothing but endless forest in every direction. As panic set in, Lily called out for her parents, her small voice swallowed by the vastness of the wilderness. Miles away, her frantic family was already alerting rangers to begin a search. But as night fell and temperatures dropped, the lost child would encounter something far more terrifying than the darkness. The first stars had just begun to appear when Lily heard it, a deep, rumbling snort that made her blood run cold. Frozen in place beneath a towering pine, she watched as branches parted and a massive brown bear emerged into the small clearing. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the usual symphony of crickets and night birds falling silent as if in deference to the apex predator that now commanded the space. 700 pounds of muscle and fur stood less than 20 feet away, its breath visible in the cooling night air. The bear's head swung toward her, nostrils flaring as it caught her scent. In the fading light, Lily could make out the creature's enormous paws, each equipped with claws that could slice through flesh with terrifying ease. Its dark eyes, intelligent and assessing, reflected the last remnants of twilight as they fixed directly on her trembling form. The bear's coat was thick and shaggy, a rich brown that appeared almost black in the gathering darkness. A jagged scar ran across its right shoulder, evidence of some long-ago battle with another predator or perhaps a run-in with human civilization. Despite her terror, Lily couldn't help but notice the majesty of the animal, its powerful shoulders rising like mountains, its presence filling the clearing with an ancient, primal energy that seemed to vibrate through the very soil beneath her feet. In his observation station 3 miles north, Ranger Calloway was reviewing footage from the network of wildlife monitoring cameras when movement on camera 12 caught his attention. The timestamp read 8:47 p.m., well after sunset. The camera was positioned at the edge of what rangers called the North Basin, a slight depression in the landscape where 3 hiking trails converged near a seasonal stream. "What the hell?" he muttered, leaning closer to the screen, the blue glow illuminating his weathered face. The infrared camera showed the unmistakable heat signature of a large adult bear. But there was something else. Something small and distinctly human-shaped, huddled against a tree. The thermal imaging rendered the child as a bright orange-yellow figure against the cooler blues and greens of the forest, a beacon of vulnerable warmth in the wilderness night. Calloway's hand shot to his radio, knocking over his coffee in the process. The dark liquid spread across his desk, seeping into maps and paperwork, but he paid it no mind. "Base, this is Calloway. I've got eyes on what appears to be a child at grid section E7, and there's a bear approaching. I'm heading there now. Send backup." His voice, normally steady and measured after years of wilderness emergencies, carried an edge that the dispatcher recognized immediately. This wasn't a routine call. This was life or death. He grabbed his gear, tranquilizer gun, first aid kit, spotlight, and bear spray, and sprinted toward his vehicle, but not before setting the cameras to record continuously. If this was the missing Morgan girl, every second mattered. The station's door slammed behind him as he raced into the night, gravel spraying from beneath the tires of his Ranger truck as he accelerated down the service road. Back in the forest, Lily had heard stories about what to do if you see a bear. Play dead, make yourself big, back away slowly. But terror had erased everything from her mind except one thought: run. Her muscles tensed, preparing for flight even as her rational mind knew it was futile. No human, let alone a small child, could outpace a bear determined to give chase. As if sensing her intention, the bear dropped to all fours and moved forward. Its massive shoulder blades rose and fell with each deliberate step, paws pressing into the soft forest floor with surprising quietness for such an enormous creature. The distance between them, 20 feet, then 15, then 10, closed with an inexorable certainty that made Lily's heart hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. A twig snapped beneath the bear's weight. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out, a haunting sound that seemed to Lily like a farewell to the world she knew. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision as the massive predator drew closer still. Her back pressed hard against the rough bark of the pine tree, as if hoping to somehow melt into it and disappear. What the ranger witnessed next would challenge everything science had ever taught us about wild predators. The footage, later analyzed by wildlife experts from around the globe, would spark debates that would rage for years to come. About animal cognition, about interspecies communication, about the very nature of what we call wild. But in that moment, as bear and child faced each other in the gathering darkness of Blackwood Forest, there were no experts, no theories, no safety protocols. There was only Lily, small and afraid, and the bear, powerful and unpredictable, and the strange, tense silence that hung between them like an unspoken question. The bear's massive head lowered, its hot breath washing over Lily's face. She closed her eyes, unable to watch what would happen next. Her small body trembled uncontrollably as tears streamed down her dirt-smudged cheeks. But the pain she expected never came. Instead, a gentle snuffling sound reached her ears as the bear's wet nose cautiously investigated her. First her shoes, then her jacket, lingering on the pocket where she'd stashed half a peanut butter sandwich hours earlier. Lily dared to open one eye, finding herself staring directly into the bear's gaze. There was something in those dark eyes that didn't match anything her 7-year-old mind associated with dangerous wild animals. Not hunger, not aggression, something almost like curiosity. The enormous creature huffed softly, then did something extraordinary. It settled its bulk down onto the forest floor, maintaining a careful distance of about 6 feet from the child. The bear's posture was relaxed, yet alert. Its head turned slightly to monitor the surrounding forest, while keeping Lily in its peripheral vision. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The night grew colder, and Lily's shivers intensified. Whether from fear or the dropping temperature, her teeth began to chatter audibly in the silence. The bear's ears twitched at the sound. And to Lily's astonishment, it rose and moved closer, not threateningly, but deliberately, until its massive body blocked the wind that had been cutting through her thin jacket. Miles away, Ranger Calloway's truck bounced violently over the rough service road as he pushed the vehicle to its limits. The radio crackled with updates. 4 search teams were converging on the coordinates, but the terrain would slow their approach. He would be the first to arrive. "What's the status on the aerial thermal imaging?" He barked into his radio. "Helicopter is 20 minutes out," came the dispatcher's voice. "Cloud cover is making conditions difficult." Calloway's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. 20 minutes could be an eternity for a child facing a wild predator. The camera feed had been automatically relayed to his tablet mounted on the dashboard, but the night vision quality made it difficult to determine exactly what was happening. All he could see was that the bear and child remained in proximity, neither moving much. It was unusual behavior. Bears typically either fled from humans or, if threatened, displayed aggression. This strange standoff defied explanation. As his headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow trail ahead, Calloway found himself hoping against hope for a miracle. In 15 years of wilderness rescue, he'd seen both the cruelty and beauty nature could offer. Tonight, he prayed for the latter. Back in the clearing, something remarkable was unfolding. The temperature had dropped further, and exhaustion was overtaking Lily's small body. Her head nodded forward as sleep threatened to claim her, despite her precarious situation. Each time her eyes closed, they became harder to reopen. The bear seemed to notice. With movements surprisingly gentle for such a massive creature, it shifted position, creating a sheltered space between its body and a fallen log. Then it made a soft grunting sound, almost like a summons. Lily, operating now on instinct rather than reason, understood somehow. Hesitantly, she crawled toward the protected nook. The bear's massive body radiated heat like a furnace, and as she cautiously settled into the space, warmth began to seep back into her frozen limbs. Under normal circumstances, no wildlife biologist would believe what happened next. The bear's large head turned, and with exquisite care, it used its muzzle to nudge Lily fully into the sheltered space, then curled its body protectively around her small form. The gesture was almost maternal, reminiscent of how a mother bear might position a vulnerable cub. As Lily's exhausted body surrendered to sleep, her last conscious thought was oddly peaceful. The monster from her nightmares had somehow become her guardian in the wilderness. What neither Lily nor the bear knew was that this unprecedented encounter was being recorded, second by second, on Ranger Calloway's wildlife cameras. Footage that would soon challenge everything scientists thought they understood about ursine behavior and interspecies connection. And as the first rescue vehicle's headlights appeared in the distance, nature held its breath, waiting to see how this impossible story would unfold. The moon emerged from behind a bank of clouds, casting silver light across the clearing. In this ethereal illumination, the scene took on an almost mythical quality. A massive predator curled protectively around a small human child, both breathing in synchronized rhythm, their unlikely alliance defying every natural law. A distant howl pierced the night. Wolves, perhaps 3 miles away. The bear's head lifted immediately, ears swiveling toward the sound. Its body tensed, but it didn't abandon its position around Lily. Instead, it seemed to pull her closer, one massive paw gently repositioning to create a more complete barrier between the child and the potential threat. Dr. Eleanor Winters, the lead wildlife biologist for the Blackwood Forest Research Station, would later spend months analyzing this footage, What we're seeing here, she would tell a rapt audience at the International Conference on Animal Cognition, challenges our fundamental understanding of interspecies interaction. This isn't just unusual behavior, it's behavior that shouldn't exist according to everything we know about wild bears. But exist it did, unfolding minute by minute in the moonlit clearing as Lily slept on, oblivious to the scientific impossibility of her situation. The bear's behavior became even more inexplicable as the night progressed. Twice it left Lily's side, but only to patrol a perimeter around the clearing, marking territory with distinctive scratches on trees, behavior typically associated with establishing a protected area. Each time, it returned to the exact same position, resuming its vigilant guard over the sleeping child. At one point, a raccoon ventured too close, attracted perhaps by the lingering scent of Lily's sandwich. The bear's response was swift but measured, a warning huff that sent the smaller animal scurrying away without disturbing the sleeping child. Ranger Calloway had abandoned his vehicle half a mile back, where the service road ended and the dense forest began. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible through the underbrush, he maintained radio contact with the approaching search teams. "I'm about 10 minutes out from the target location," he whispered. "What's the status on tranquilizers?" "Dr. Winters is with Team 2, came the response. "She has dosing appropriate for a bear that size, but she's concerned about the proximity to the child. If the bear falls in the wrong direction..." Calloway understood the unspoken concern. A sedated bear collapsing onto a small child could be fatal. "Understood. I'll assess the situation when I arrive. Tell all teams to maintain noise discipline. Last thing we need is to startle this bear." As he navigated through the dark forest, guided by his GPS and years of experience, Calloway found his mind returning to something Dr. Winters had mentioned during a staff training last year. A controversial theory about certain bears exhibiting anomalous behaviors that some researchers termed cross-species empathy. The scientific community had largely dismissed these observations as anthropomorphism, the human tendency to project human emotions onto animal behavior. But what if there was something to it? The forest thinned slightly, and Calloway slowed his approach. According to his GPS, he was now less than 100 yards from the clearing. Moving with practiced stealth, he found a vantage point that would allow him to observe without being detected. What he saw through his night vision binoculars made his breath catch. The bear, a mature female, he could now tell, was not just near the child, but had created what could only be described as a protective nest. The little girl was tucked against the bear's side, her red jacket visible against the dark fur, sleeping as peacefully as if she were in her own bed, rather than in the embrace of one of nature's most formidable predators. "I have visual," he whispered into his radio. "You're not going to believe this." He described the scene in clinical detail, his training overriding his astonishment. As he spoke, he noticed something else. The bear's head had turned slightly, its nostrils flaring. Despite his caution, it had caught his scent. For a tense moment, Calloway prepared to deploy his bear spray, his hand moving slowly to the canister on his belt. But the bear's reaction defied expectation once again. Rather than displaying aggression or fleeing, it simply adjusted its position, placing its body more completely between the perceived new threat, Calloway, and the sleeping child. "It's protecting her," he breathed into the radio, disbelief evident in his voice. "Say again," came the dispatcher's confused response. Before Calloway could clarify, a new sound reached his ears, the distant but approaching thrum of the search helicopter. The bear heard it too, its head lifting, eyes scanning the night sky. The ranger faced an impossible decision. Standard protocol would have him retreat, allowing the animal response team to handle the situation. But something told him that the arrival of a helicopter and multiple search teams might shatter whatever mysterious bond had formed between bear and child, potentially putting Lily in danger if the bear panicked. In that moment, James Calloway made a decision that would later be scrutinized by review boards and wildlife management officials. A decision based not on protocol, but on the inexplicable scene before him and 20 years of wilderness intuition. "All teams hold position," he ordered into his radio. "Divert the helicopter. I'm going in alone." "Calloway, that's against protocol," came the immediate response from his supervisor. "So is what I'm seeing," he replied firmly. "Trust me on this. Something extraordinary is happening here, and we need to handle it delicately." Ignoring the protests erupting from his radio, Calloway switched it to vibrate and began a slow, deliberate approach toward the clearing. He moved with exaggerated care, making no sudden movements, his body language deliberately non-threatening. The bear watched his approach, alert but not aggressive, its dark eyes reflecting the moonlight as it assessed this new development. Calloway stopped at the edge of the clearing, maintaining a respectful distance, and did something that no training manual would ever recommend. He sat down, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Hello there," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt either of you. I just want to make sure the little one gets home safe." The bear's ears flicked forward, tracking his voice. For several long moments, they remained in this tableau, man and bear regarding each other across a moonlit clearing, the sleeping child between them like some living bridge between their worlds. Then, in a gesture that would be replayed on nature documentaries and news reports around the world, the bear did something remarkable. It lowered its massive head and made a soft chuffing sound, a vocalization that researchers would later identify as one typically used by mother bears to reassure their cubs. What happened next would change James Calloway's life forever, altering the trajectory of his career and challenging everything he thought he knew about the divide between humans and wild animals. But in that moment, all he knew was that he was witnessing something profound, something that transcended the boundaries between species and spoke to a deeper, more primal connection that science had yet to fully understand. James Calloway had faced charging moose, territorial wolves, and once even a mountain lion that had stalked him for 3 miles along a ridgeline, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. Attempting to approach a 700-pound wild bear that was, inexplicably, sheltering a lost child. The soft chuffing sound the bear had made hung in the air between them. Calloway remained seated, his body language deliberately non-threatening, as he inched forward on the forest floor. Each movement was slow and telegraphed, his eyes never leaving the bear's face. "That's right," he murmured, keeping his voice low and even. "We're all friends here." The bear watched him with unnerving intelligence, its massive head tracking his progress. At 5 yards distance, Calloway paused. Any closer would be pushing the boundaries of even this unusual situation. From here, he could see Lily clearly, her chest rising and falling in the deep, untroubled sleep of exhaustion, completely unaware of the drama unfolding around her. "Lily?" he called softly. "Lily Morgan? Can you wake up for me, sweetheart?" The child stirred slightly, but didn't wake. The bear's ears flicked forward at the sound of Calloway's voice, but it made no aggressive move. Instead, it shifted position slightly, adjusting its bulk to better see the ranger while maintaining its protective posture around the girl. Calloway's radio vibrated against his hip, undoubtedly his supervisor demanding an update or ordering him to retreat. He ignored it. This moment required complete focus. Any distraction could shatter the delicate trust being established. "I'm going to try something," he said, as much to himself as to the bear. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a protein bar. The bear's nostrils flared immediately, catching the scent. Its head lifted higher, suddenly alert. With deliberate movements, Calloway unwrapped the bar and broke off a piece, which he placed on the ground between them. Then he took a small bite himself, chewed and swallowed, a universal sign across species. This is food. It's safe. The bear watched this performance with evident interest, but made no move toward the offered food. Its priority seemed to remain the sleeping child. "You're something else, aren't you?" Calloway murmured, genuine wonder in his voice. "Not like any bear I've ever met." As if in response, the bear made that soft chuffing sound again. In the stillness of the night, with moonlight filtering through the canopy above, the moment took on an almost surreal quality, as if the normal rules of the natural world had been temporarily suspended in this small clearing. Calloway decided to risk moving closer. Inch by inch, he reduced the distance between them until he was just 3 yards from the bear and child. Close enough now to see the bear's whiskers, the texture of its dense fur, the scars that marked its muzzle from some long-ago encounter. "Lily," he called again, a bit louder this time. "Lily, it's Ranger Calloway. Your mom and dad sent me to find you." This time, the child stirred more definitively. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. For a moment, confusion clouded her features as she tried to reconcile the unfamiliar surroundings with the strange warmth against her back. Then awareness dawned, and her eyes widened as she realized exactly what was curled around her. To Calloway's amazement, she showed no fear, only a child's wonder. "The bear's been keeping me warm," she said matter-of-factly, her voice hoarse from sleep and thirst. "She's nice." The ranger couldn't help but smile despite the tension of the situation. "I can see that. She's been taking good care of you, hasn't she?" Lily nodded, sitting up slightly. The bear allowed this movement, adjusting its position to accommodate her, but maintaining its protective stance. "I was scared at first," the child admitted. "But then she didn't hurt me. She just sniffed me a lot and then laid down. And when it got cold, she let me get close to her." Calloway nodded, his mind racing to process this information while maintaining his calm exterior. "That was very brave of you, Lily. Now, do you think you could come over to me? Your parents are very worried." The mention of her parents brought tears to Lily's eyes. "Mom and Dad are looking for me." "The whole Forest Service is looking for you," Calloway assured her. "Everyone wants to make sure you get home safe." Lily looked uncertainly between the ranger and the bear, a child's concern evident on her face. "But what about her? Will she be okay if I leave?" The question was so unexpected, so innocent in its empathy, that Calloway felt something catch in his throat. "She'll be fine, Lily. This is her home. She knows how to take care of herself." The child seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly. With careful movements, she began to extract herself from the protective circle of the bear's body. The animal watched, but made no move to stop her, though its eyes remained fixed on Calloway with unmistakable warning. "That's it," the ranger encouraged, extending his hand without rising from his seated position. "Nice and slow." Lily took a tentative step toward him, then another. The bear shifted its weight, rising slightly, but not fully standing. Calloway felt his muscles tense, ready to react if necessary. But he maintained his outward calm. "You're doing great, Lily," he said softly. "Just a few more steps." The child moved forward, crossing the invisible boundary that separated the bear's space from the ranger's. As she reached Calloway's side, he gently pulled her close with one arm, his other hand remaining visible and non-threatening. "Thank you for taking care of me," Lily called to the bear, the sincerity in her voice unmistakable. The bear made that chuffing sound once more, then slowly, deliberately, began to back away. It maintained eye contact with Calloway until it reached the edge of the clearing, then turned and disappeared into the darkness of the forest, a shadow melting into shadows. Only when he was certain the bear had departed did Calloway allow himself to exhale fully. He activated his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "This is Calloway. I have the child. She's safe and unharmed." The radio erupted with voices. Relief, questions, coordinates for extraction. He answered mechanically, his mind still processing what he had witnessed. Lily leaned against him, exhaustion evident in every line of her small body. "Let's get you home," he said gently, rising and lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. This child who had somehow formed an impossible bond with one of nature's most formidable predators. As he carried her toward the rendezvous point, where the search teams were converging, Lily rested her head against his shoulder. "Ranger Calloway?" she murmured sleepily. "Yes, Lily." "I think the bear was magic, like in a fairy tale." Calloway smiled, though his scientific mind was already cataloging alternative explanations. A bear that had recently lost cubs, perhaps, or some rare neurological anomaly that affected typical predatory instincts. But looking down at the child's peaceful face, he couldn't bring himself to contradict her. "Maybe she was," he agreed softly. "Maybe she was." What neither of them knew, as they made their way through the moonlit forest toward the waiting search teams, was that this night would change more than just their lives. The footage captured by Calloway's wildlife cameras would soon challenge fundamental scientific understandings of animal behavior, spark international debates about consciousness and empathy in non-human species, and ultimately lead to groundbreaking protections for the wilderness they were now leaving behind. But those were concerns for tomorrow. Tonight, there was only relief, wonder, and the lingering memory of an encounter that defied explanation. A moment when the boundary between human and wild had briefly, mysteriously dissolved. The forest seemed to part before them as Calloway carried Lily through the undergrowth. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor that shifted and changed with each step. The night had grown quieter, as if the woodland creatures were holding their breath, watching this strange procession. A man carrying a child who had been touched by something beyond understanding. Lily's weight in his arms was a tangible reminder of the responsibility he carried. Not just the physical burden of a tired child, but the weight of an experience that defied categorization. As a scientist and ranger, Calloway had been trained to observe, document, and explain the natural world. But what explanation could possibly account for what he had witnessed tonight? His mind replayed the scene in the clearing, the bear's protective posture, the gentle chuffing sounds, the way it had created a sheltered space for the child against the cold night. None of it aligned with established understanding of ursine behavior. Bears were solitary creatures, largely indifferent to species outside their own, except as potential threats or prey. The idea that a wild bear would not only spare a human child, but actively protect her, flew in the face of everything wildlife biology had established. Yet he couldn't deny the evidence of his own eyes. Something extraordinary had happened in that clearing, something that would require him to reevaluate fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness and interspecies relationships. Ranger Calloway? Lily's small voice interrupted his thoughts. Yes, Lily? I'm really thirsty. The simple human need snapped Calloway back to the immediate present. Of course she was thirsty. She'd been lost in the wilderness for nearly 18 hours. He stopped, shifting her weight to one arm while he retrieved his canteen with the other. Small sips, he cautioned as he held it to her lips. Not too fast. She drank obediently, water dribbling down her chin in her eagerness. When she had taken enough, he recapped the canteen and continued walking. We'll get you properly checked out when we reach the others, he assured her. Make sure you're okay. Lily nodded against his shoulder, then asked, Will I see the bear again? The question caught him off guard. I don't think so, Lily. Bears usually stay away from people. What happened tonight was unusual. But she liked me, Lily insisted with a child's certainty. She was my friend. Calloway chose his words carefully. I think she was looking out for you, yes. But bears belong in the wild, and you belong at home with your family. It's better that way for both of you. Lily fell silent, processing this in her own way. After a moment, she said, I'm going to draw her a picture, so I remember her. I think that's a wonderful idea, Calloway replied, touched by the sentiment. They continued in companionable silence for several minutes before Lily spoke again, her voice taking on the dreamy quality of a child hovering between wakefulness and sleep. She had dreams, she murmured. What do you mean? Calloway asked, puzzled by the statement. When I was sleeping next to her, I could tell she was dreaming. She made little noises and her paws twitched, just like my dog does when he dreams about chasing squirrels. Lily yawned widely. I wonder what bears dream about. The observation struck Calloway as remarkably perceptive. Of course, bears experienced REM sleep and likely dreamed. But to hear it described so matter-of-factly by a 7-year-old who had witnessed it firsthand was strangely moving. What do you think she was dreaming about? He asked, genuinely curious about the child's perspective. Lily considered this seriously. Maybe about her family, or finding honey, or... She paused, her brow furrowing in concentration. Maybe about being a person instead of a bear. Just for a day, to see what it's like. The whimsical answer brought a smile to Calloway's face. That's a big imagination you've got there. Mom says I get it from Grandpa Joe. He told the best stories. Her voice grew softer. Before he went to heaven. Calloway nodded, understanding the reference to loss. Well, I think your grandpa would be very proud of how brave you've been tonight. This seemed to please Lily, who nestled more comfortably against his shoulder. Ahead, Calloway could see flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, the search teams converging on their location. The extraction point was close. As they approached, voices called out, first in question, then in celebration, as the searchers confirmed that Ranger Calloway had indeed found the missing child. Flashlights bobbed and weaved through the trees as team members rushed forward. The first to reach them was Dr. Eleanor Winters, the wildlife biologist who had been coordinating with the search teams. Her face, illuminated by the harsh beam of her headlamp, registered first relief, then scientific curiosity as she took in the unharmed state of the child. Is she? Dr. Winters began. She's fine, Calloway confirmed. Tired, thirsty, but completely unharmed. The biologist's eyes narrowed slightly, her professional interest evident. And the bear? Gone back into the forest. I'll brief you fully once we get Lily to medical. Dr. Winters nodded, understanding the priority, though her expression made it clear she had 1,000 questions burning to be asked. She fell into step beside them as they continued toward the larger group. The scene that greeted them at the extraction point was controlled chaos. Emergency vehicles with flashing lights, search team members radioing updates, medical personnel preparing to receive the child. As soon as they emerged from the tree line, they were surrounded. Paramedics gently took Lily from Calloway's arms, wrapping her in a thermal blanket and beginning a preliminary examination. The ranger felt a strange reluctance to let her go, as if in releasing her, he was somehow breaking a connection to the extraordinary events they had shared. Ranger Calloway will stay with me, right? Lily asked anxiously as the paramedics began checking her vital signs. I'll be right here, he assured her, moving to stand near the gurney where they had placed her. I'm not going anywhere. This seemed to satisfy her, and she submitted to the medical examination with the same quiet bravery she had shown throughout the ordeal. The paramedics worked efficiently, checking for hypothermia, dehydration, and any injuries that might not be immediately apparent. Remarkable, murmured the lead paramedic, a veteran named Sharma whom Calloway had worked with on previous rescues. Not even mild hypothermia, despite the overnight temperatures, and no injuries beyond minor scratches consistent with moving through underbrush. She had help staying warm, Calloway said quietly, meeting the paramedic's questioning gaze with a look that promised explanation later. Before further discussion could occur, a commotion at the perimeter announced new arrivals. A man and woman broke through the circle of searchers, their faces etched with a particular anguish that only parents of a missing child can know. Lily, the woman cried, rushing forward. Mom, Dad. Lily's face lit up with joy as her parents reached the gurney. What followed was a reunion of such raw emotion that Calloway found himself looking away, feeling like an intruder on this private moment. The Morgan family clung to each other, tears flowing freely, words tumbling out in a chaotic mixture of relief, love, and lingering fear now being released. We thought, Mr. Morgan began, his voice breaking. I know, his wife soothed, though her own voice was thick with emotion. But she's here now. She's safe. Calloway stepped back, allowing the family their space. Dr. Winters approached him, her clipboard clutched to her chest, eyes alight with professional curiosity. James, she said quietly, using his first name as she did only when they were discussing something of particular significance. What happened out there? The radio communications mentioned something about the bear actually protecting the child. Calloway ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how exhausted he felt. Eleanor, I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. It wasn't just that the bear didn't harm her, it actively sheltered her, created a protected space for her to sleep, positioned itself between her and potential threats. Dr. Winters' expression shifted from curiosity to intense scientific interest. That's unprecedented behavior, completely outside documented parameters for ursine interaction with humans. I know. You're certain of what you saw. The stress of the situation, the poor lighting. I'm certain, Calloway interrupted firmly. And there's more. The cameras were recording the entire interaction. We have it documented. The biologist inhaled sharply. We need to review that footage immediately. If what you're describing is accurate, this could fundamentally alter our understanding of... She was interrupted by the approach of the Morgan family. Lily, still wrapped in the thermal blanket but now held securely in her father's arms, looked small and fragile, yet somehow more resilient than anyone else present. "Ranger Calloway," Mrs. Morgan said, her voice trembling with emotion. "They told us you went in alone, that you risked your life to save our daughter. We can never thank you enough." Calloway shook his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did my job, ma'am. And to be honest, Lily was doing pretty well even before I got there. The paramedics said she should have been hypothermic given the night temperatures," Mr. Morgan said, confusion evident in his voice. "How did she stay warm out there?" A moment of silence fell as Calloway considered how to explain what had happened. Before he could formulate a response, Lily spoke up, her voice clear and matter-of-fact. "The bear kept me warm, Daddy. She was like a big, furry blanket, and she made sure nothing bad could get me." Her parents exchanged alarmed glances, clearly assuming this was some kind of coping fantasy their daughter had created to deal with the trauma of being lost. "Sweetie," her mother began gently, "there wasn't really a..." "Actually," Calloway interrupted, meeting Mrs. Morgan's eyes steadily, "there was. A female brown bear. And what Lily's telling you is exactly what happened." The stunned silence that followed was broken only by Dr. Winters clearing her throat. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion at the ranger station. The medical team wants to transport Lily to the hospital for a more thorough examination. Standard procedure in these cases. Ranger Calloway and I can meet you there afterward to explain everything." The Morgans nodded numbly, still processing this impossible information. As they turned to follow the paramedics to the waiting ambulance, Lily called over her father's shoulder. "Ranger Calloway, you won't forget to check on her, will you? To make sure she's okay?" The simple request, delivered with a child's earnest concern, touched something deep in Calloway's heart. "I promise, Lily. I'll keep an eye on her." Satisfied with this assurance, Lily allowed her parents to carry her to the ambulance. As the vehicle's doors closed and it began its careful journey down the rough forest road, Calloway turned to find Dr. Winters studying him intently. "You really believe it, don't you?" she asked quietly. "That this bear consciously chose to protect a human child?" Calloway looked back toward the dark forest, thinking of the bear that had disappeared into its depths. An animal that had defied everything science thought it knew about the boundaries between species. "I don't just believe it, Eleanor," he replied. "I saw it, and now we have to figure out what it means." As dawn broke over Blackwood Forest, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, the search teams began to disperse. The immediate crisis was over, the lost child found and returned to her family. But for James Calloway and Dr. Eleanor Winters, standing at the edge of the forest as the new day began, a different kind of journey was just beginning. One that would lead them into uncharted territory at the intersection of science, nature, and something that might, just possibly, be called magic. The fluorescent lights of Blackwood Memorial Hospital cast a sterile glow over the waiting room, where James Calloway sat, his ranger's hat resting on his knee. The adrenaline that had carried him through the night had long since faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that coffee couldn't touch. He'd been awake for nearly 30 hours straight, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. Across from him, Dr. Eleanor Winters was reviewing the preliminary footage from his wildlife camera on her tablet, her face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. Every few minutes, she would pause the video, make a notation, then continue. Her expression betrayed nothing, but the tension in her shoulders told Calloway she was as affected by what she was seeing as he had been by witnessing it firsthand. "This is," she began, then shook her head, unable to find adequate words. "I know," Calloway replied simply. The hospital corridor bustled with the usual morning activity. Nurses changing shifts, doctors making rounds, the occasional announcement over the PA system. It all seemed surreally normal compared to what they had experienced in the forest. Eleanor finally set the tablet down and looked directly at him. "The scientific community is going to have a field day with this, James. Half will call it a hoax, and the other half will try to explain it away with existing behavioral models." "And what do you think?" he asked, genuinely curious about her professional assessment. She hesitated, choosing her words with characteristic precision. "I think we've documented something that falls outside our current understanding of ursine behavior, something that challenges fundamental assumptions about interspecies empathy and decision-making in non-human animals." She paused, then added more quietly, "And on a personal level, I think it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen." Before Calloway could respond, the door to Lily's examination room opened, and Dr. Patel emerged, clipboard in hand. The physician's expression was one of professional puzzlement as he approached them. "Ranger Calloway, Dr. Winters," he acknowledged with a nod. "I've completed my examination of Lily Morgan, and frankly, I'm at a loss to explain her condition. Or rather, the lack of adverse conditions." "What do you mean?" Calloway asked, though he suspected he already knew. Dr. Patel consulted his notes. A 7-year-old child spent approximately 18 hours in wilderness conditions, including overnight exposure to temperatures that dropped to just above freezing. She should be showing signs of hypothermia, dehydration, and significant physical stress. Instead, I find her core body temperature normal, her hydration levels only mildly compromised, and her overall condition remarkably good. He looked up, his expression serious. "The parents mentioned something about a bear?" Eleanor and Calloway exchanged glances. "It's complicated," Calloway began. "We have video documentation," Eleanor added, indicating her tablet. "The bear appears to have created a sheltered microclimate for the child, using its body heat to maintain her temperature through the night." Dr. Patel's eyebrows rose. "You're serious?" "Completely," Calloway confirmed. The doctors seemed to struggle with this information, his medical training clearly at odds with what he was being told. "I've worked in rural medicine for 15 years. Bears don't protect lost children, Ranger Calloway. They eat them." "Under normal circumstances, I'd agree with you," Eleanor interjected, her tone professional but firm. "But the evidence in this case suggests something highly unusual occurred. We're still analyzing exactly what that might be." Dr. Patel looked unconvinced, but seemed unwilling to argue further. "Well, whatever happened out there, Lily Morgan is one very lucky little girl. I'm keeping her for observation today, but barring any unforeseen complications, she should be able to go home tomorrow." "Can we see her?" Calloway asked. "The parents have requested to speak with you, so yes. But keep it brief. She needs rest." With that, Dr. Patel handed them visitor passes and departed, still shaking his head slightly. Lily's hospital room was brightened by a vase of wildflowers someone had brought, their vivid colors a stark contrast to the institutional whites and beiges. The child herself looked tiny in the adult-sized bed, her red hair splayed across the pillow. Despite her ordeal, her face had regained its color, and her eyes brightened when she saw Calloway. "Ranger Calloway," she exclaimed, sitting up straighter. "Did you check on the bear? Is she okay?" The ranger smiled, touched by her continued concern for the animal. "I haven't been back to that part of the forest yet, Lily, but I'm sure she's fine. Bears are very good at taking care of themselves." Mrs. Morgan, who had been sitting beside the bed, rose to greet them. The strain of the past 24 hours showed clearly on her face, but relief had softened the worst of it. "Ranger Calloway," she said warmly, extending her hand. "And you must be Dr. Winters. The hospital staff mentioned you'd be coming by." Introductions were made, and Mr. Morgan, who had been gazing out the window, turned to join the conversation. Unlike his wife, whose relief manifested as warmth, he seemed to be struggling with a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude, certainly, but also confusion and something that looked almost like anger. "I think we deserve a full explanation of what happened out there," he said without preamble. "Because frankly, this story about a bear protecting our daughter sounds like something from a children's book, not real life." Eleanor stepped forward, her professional demeanor taking over. "Mr. Morgan, I understand your skepticism. It's entirely warranted. What Lily experienced is unprecedented in documented wildlife behavior. But we have video evidence that confirms exactly what she and Ranger Calloway have described." "May we see it?" Mrs. Morgan asked quietly. Eleanor hesitated, glancing at Lily. "Perhaps it would be better if we reviewed it privately first. Some aspects might be distressing to view, even though the outcome was positive." Mr. Morgan nodded curtly. "Fine, but I want answers. Real ones." "Dad," Lily's small voice interrupted. "The bear really did help me. She wasn't mean at all." The simple certainty in her voice seemed to deflate some of her father's tension. He moved to sit on the edge of her bed, taking her hand in his. "I know you believe that, sweetheart. And I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just want to understand how it happened." "That's what we're trying to figure out too," Calloway assured him. "It's not something any of us have seen before." A nurse appeared in the doorway, announcing that Lily needed to rest. As the adults prepared to leave, Lily called out to Calloway once more. "Ranger Calloway, can I ask you something?" He moved back to her bedside. "Of course, Lily." "Does the bear have a name?" The question caught him off guard. "Well, no. Wild animals don't usually have names, except in scientific studies where researchers might use numbers or codes to identify them." Lily frowned, clearly dissatisfied with this answer. "She should have a name. She's special." Calloway smiled. "You're right about that. She is special. Did you have a name in mind?" The child thought for a moment, her face serious with concentration. Then she brightened. "Athena, like in the mythology book Grandpa gave me. She was the goddess of wisdom and protecting people." The choice surprised Calloway. It was unexpectedly sophisticated for a 7-year-old. "That's a perfect name, Lily. Athena it is." Satisfied, Lily settled back against her pillows. As Calloway turned to leave, she added sleepily, "Ranger Calloway, I drew her picture. It's on the table." He glanced at the bedside table where, indeed, a child's drawing lay. It depicted a large brown bear and a small red-haired girl, standing side by side in a forest clearing. Simple as it was, there was something striking about the illustration. The bear was drawn not as threatening or fearsome, but with what could only be described as a gentle expression, its massive body angled protectively toward the child. "May I?" he asked, reaching for the drawing. Lily nodded, her eyelids growing heavy. It's for you. So you can remember her too. Touched, Calloway carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his shirt pocket. Thank you, Lily. I'll keep it safe. In the hospital corridor, the Morgans, Calloway, and Dr. Winters gathered in a small consultation room. Eleanor connected her tablet to a wall-mounted screen and pulled up the footage from Calloway's wildlife camera. Before I play this, she cautioned, I want to emphasize that what you're about to see is completely genuine, unedited footage. It's also, from a scientific perspective, unexplainable by our current understanding of wildlife behavior. The Morgans nodded, and Eleanor started the video. For the next 20 minutes, they watched in silence as the extraordinary encounter unfolded on screen. The bear's initial investigation of Lily, its decision to remain nearby rather than flee or attack. The gradual evolution of its behavior from cautious observation to active protection. The night vision quality of the footage gave the scene an otherworldly quality. But the reality of what they were witnessing was undeniable. When the video ended with Calloway's approach and Lily's eventual rescue, Mrs. Morgan was openly weeping. Even Mr. Morgan, who had maintained his skeptical expression throughout, looked shaken. That's not possible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. And yet, it happened, Eleanor replied gently. We're as puzzled as you are, Mr. Morgan. This behavior contradicts everything we know about wild bears. So what does it mean? Mrs. Morgan asked, wiping away tears. Why would a wild animal do this for a human child? It was the question that had been haunting Calloway since the moment he first witnessed the bear's behavior. I don't have a definitive answer, he admitted. From a purely biological perspective, there are theories about cross-species empathy, about maternal instincts being triggered by the presence of a young one, regardless of species. But those theories usually apply to animals with higher cognitive functions or those that have been socialized with humans. This bear has no history of human interaction that we're aware of, Eleanor added. She's tagged in our wildlife database, female, approximately 7 years old, no unusual behavioral notes in her file. Until last night, she was just one of many bears in Blackwood Forest. And now? Mr. Morgan asked. Calloway and Eleanor exchanged glances. Now, Eleanor said carefully, she's potentially the subject of what could be a groundbreaking study in animal cognition and interspecies behavior. If you're comfortable with that, of course. What does that mean for Lily? Mrs. Morgan asked, protective instinct evident in her voice. Nothing that would involve her directly, Calloway assured her quickly. We would continue to monitor the bear, Athena, as Lily is named, her, and study the footage we already have. Any papers or research would focus on the bear's behavior, not on Lily herself. The Morgans seemed to relax slightly at this assurance. There is one more thing, Eleanor added hesitantly. The scientific significance of this event is substantial. Once our findings are published, there will likely be media interest. We can work to protect Lily's privacy as much as possible, but it might be difficult to keep the story completely contained. Mr. Morgan's expression hardened again. I don't want my daughter turned into some kind of sideshow attraction. She's been through enough. We completely understand and respect that, Calloway said firmly. Any public communication about this would be entirely at your discretion and comfort level. A thoughtful silence fell over the room as the Morgans processed everything they had heard and seen. Finally, Mrs. Morgan spoke. Lily believes this bear, Athena, saved her life, and after seeing that footage, I believe it too. She looked at her husband, then back to Calloway and Eleanor. If studying what happened can help us understand why, then we support that. But Lily's well-being comes first, always. Absolutely, Eleanor agreed. We'll draw up a formal agreement that gives you final approval on any research publications or media communications involving this incident. Mr. Morgan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this approach. There's something else I've been wondering, he said, his tone softer now. What happens to the bear now? Will she be relocated or something because she had contact with humans? It was a perceptive question that showed genuine concern, surprising Calloway given the man's earlier skepticism. That's actually something we need to discuss with our wildlife management team, he explained. Standard protocol would indeed suggest relocation when a bear has significant human contact, to prevent habituation that could lead to dangerous situations in the future. But this isn't a standard situation, Eleanor interjected. Athena didn't display any behaviors that would typically concern us about human safety. Quite the opposite, in fact. And relocating her would make ongoing observation for our research more difficult. So she stays in Blackwood Forest? Mrs. Morgan asked. That would be my recommendation, Calloway confirmed. With appropriate monitoring and possibly some adjustments to visitor access in her territory, at least temporarily. The conversation continued for some time, addressing the practical and ethical questions raised by the extraordinary encounter. Throughout the discussion, Calloway found himself repeatedly drawn back to the image of the bear, Athena, creating that protective space for Lily, making those soft, chuffing sounds that seemed to transcend the boundaries between species. Whatever scientific explanation they eventually developed, he knew that moment would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the golf meeting concluded and they prepared to part ways, Mrs. Morgan pulled Calloway aside. "Ranger Calloway," she said quietly, "there's something I haven't mentioned. Something Lily told me this morning before you arrived." She hesitated, seeming unsure whether to continue. "What is it?" he prompted gently. She said that while she was sleeping next to the bear, she had dreams. Dreams where she could see through the bear's eyes, feel what the bear was feeling. Mrs. Morgan shook her head slightly. "I assumed it was just her imagination processing the trauma, but after seeing that footage, I don't know what to think anymore." Calloway considered this new information carefully. The scientist in him wanted to dismiss it as exactly what Mrs. Morgan had initially thought. A child's mind creating narrative from trauma. But after what he had witnessed in that clearing, he found himself less certain of the boundaries between possible and impossible. Children often have vivid imaginations, especially after stressful experiences, he said diplomatically. But I'll make a note of it in our observations. Mrs. Morgan nodded, seemingly relieved to have shared this final piece of the puzzle. "Thank you for everything." As Calloway and Eleanor left the hospital and stepped into the bright midday sunshine, a weight of responsibility settled over them. Responsibility not just to science and their professional fields, but to Lily, to her family, and perhaps most complexly, to Athena herself. "What now?" Eleanor asked as they walked toward the parking lot. Calloway thought of the drawing in his pocket. The bear and the girl, standing side by side in the forest. Now we try to understand what happened. Not just the how, but the why. And if we can't, if there is no scientific explanation that fully accounts for what we saw, he considered this possibility, one that his rational mind wanted to reject, but that his experience forced him to consider. Then we acknowledge the limits of our understanding, and we protect both Lily and Athena from those who would exploit what we don't understand. As they reached their vehicles, the morning sun illuminated the distant outline of Blackwood Forest on the horizon. Somewhere in those ancient trees, a bear named Athena was going about her day, hunting, foraging, perhaps resting in the same clearing where an impossible encounter had taken place. And whatever had transpired between her and a lost human child, whatever boundaries had been crossed or connections formed, the forest kept its secrets, waiting for science, or something beyond science, to unravel them. I'll head back to the research station to secure the footage and begin preliminary documentation, Eleanor said, her voice returning to its professional cadence. We should convene the full research team by tomorrow. Calloway nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the distant forest. I think I'll head back to the clearing first. There might be physical evidence we missed in the darkness. Eleanor gave him a knowing look. You just want to check on her, don't you? On Athena. He smiled slightly, not bothering to deny it. I made a promise to Lily. As Eleanor drove away, Calloway stood for a moment longer in the hospital parking lot, feeling the weight of Lily's drawing in his pocket and the even heavier weight of the mystery that now connected them all. Ranger, scientist, child, and bear. Whatever explanations they eventually found or failed to find, he knew that none of them would emerge from this experience unchanged. And perhaps, he thought as he finally turned toward his own vehicle, that was the most profound aspect of what had occurred in that moonlit clearing. Not just that a wild bear had protected a human child, but that in doing so, it had reminded them all of connections deeper and more mysterious than their scientific frameworks could fully capture. With this thought settling into his consciousness, James Calloway began the drive back to Blackwood Forest, where ancient trees stood silent witness to the ongoing dance between the wild and the human, the known and the unknowable. The clearing looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, more ordinary. James Calloway stood at its edge, documenting evidence of last night's extraordinary encounter. Flattened grass where the bear had lain, a child's footprints in soft earth. Strands of coarse brown fur caught on branches. His radio crackled. Calloway, do you copy? Director Harmon wants a full briefing at 1600 hours. I'll be there, he confirmed, continuing his methodical examination. A rustling in the underbrush made him freeze. Then he saw her. Athena emerged from between two ancient pines, pausing at the clearing's edge. Protocol dictated retreat, but something in the bear's demeanor, a curious tilt of her head, a lack of aggression, made him hesitate. Hello again, he said softly. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the clearing. Then Athena lowered her massive head and began foraging, seemingly unconcerned by his presence. Behavior unusual enough to be noteworthy. When Calloway unfolded Lily's drawing, the child's representation of herself and the bear standing side by side, Athena moved closer and sat on her haunches, tilting her head as if in question. She's fine, Calloway said, feeling slightly foolish, yet unable to shake the feeling that communication was occurring. Lily, the little girl, she's safe thanks to you. For nearly 20 minutes, this impossible tableau held, Ranger and bear sharing the clearing in strange, peaceful communion. Eventually, Athena rose, gave Calloway one final look, and disappeared back into the forest. At the research station, the afternoon briefing was tense. Director Harmon frowned as Calloway and Dr. Winters presented their findings. You understand, Ranger Calloway? that what you're describing contradicts everything we know about Ursine behavior toward humans. I do, sir. And if I hadn't witnessed it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. But the video evidence supports my account. The researchers debated potential explanations, misplaced maternal instincts, neurological abnormalities, but none seemed to fully capture what Calloway had witnessed. "There's something else," he said finally. Lily reported having dreams while she slept beside Athena. Dreams in which she experienced the forest through the bear's senses. Director Harmon's frown deepened. "Are you suggesting some kind of psychic connection that steps well outside the boundaries of scientific inquiry?" "I'm not suggesting anything specific," Calloway replied. "I'm merely noting that there may be aspects of this encounter that our current scientific frameworks aren't equipped to fully explain." After the meeting, Dr. Sanderson approached. "Your grandmother was Nez Perce, wasn't she? Margaret Redfeather?" "Yes," Calloway confirmed, surprised. "How did you know?" "I interviewed her years ago. She mentioned a grandson training to be a wildlife ranger, you, I assume." Sanderson smiled. "Perhaps what happened in that clearing suggests we don't have to choose between traditional knowledge and Western science. That there are phenomena, both perspectives, together, might help us understand more fully." Later, Eleanor showed Calloway Athena's tracking data. After leaving the clearing, she traveled northeast, normal foraging behavior. But at around 4 a.m., she changed direction and headed directly to the Morgan family's cabin. She circled the property twice before returning to her territory. "She was checking on Lily," Calloway said softly. "That would be an unscientific conclusion," Eleanor replied carefully. "But yes, the pattern is suggestive." They looked at each other, aware of the implications. Whatever had happened between Lily and Athena, it hadn't ended in that forest clearing. Something more profound was still unfolding. Something that challenged not just their understanding of wildlife behavior, but perhaps their very conception of the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. "What do we do with this information?" Calloway asked. Eleanor's expression was resolute. "What scientists always do when confronted with the unexplained. We keep observing, we keep questioning, we follow the evidence wherever it leads."